Museum is a place where time does not matter. Looking at the artifacts, we are experiencing the most vivid and exciting moments of history. The program Secrets of Museums on Kazakh TV channel. By the end of the 19th century, the industrial civilization that was established in Western Europe and the United States began to expand in other countries. It proclaimed a stable standard of living, new opportunities, guaranteed the right to private property. On the other hand, the constant growth of industrial production dictated the need for economic expansion, which, in turn, led to a clash of interests of leading powers. By the beginning of the 20th century, there were two main blocs in Europe and some countries of Asia, the Entente and the Triple Alliance. The presence of two powerful military factions in the center of Europe approximated the World War I. Realizing the inevitability of the war, the countries of the opposing blocs were preparing for future shocks. The main task of the UK was to control resources, particularly fossil ores, in the southern Africa and in the territory of modern Kazakhstan. At the beginning of the 20th century, industrial production steadily developed in Kazakhstan. It emerged in the last quarter of the 19th century. The capital was imported in the country and various enterprises were created on the found deposits. Mining, coal, and oil industry of the region attracted foreign capitalists. Development of industry and domestic trade in Kazakhstan was facilitated by the construction of railways. For example, 514 kilometers of rail lines were built during the last decade of the 19th century. In the 20th century, the construction of new directions, Orenburg-Tashkent, Troitskaya, Altai, and Semiranchenskaya railways began in Kazakhstan. 3,000 kilometers of railways had been constructed in Kazakhstan by 1917. It is these global economic factors that contributed to the formation of many cities and villages. Among them, there is an urban-type settlement, Kapsakpai. Many historians call it the Museum of Kazakhstani Metallurgy, and for a good reason. At one time, the settlement was a landmark for the whole country. It was here where Kazakhstan's copper industry was originated. And the settlement itself was built around one of the first copper smelters in the history of the USSR and Kazakhstan. Karsakpai region, located near the modern city of Zhezkazgan, already at that time was of great importance for the copper smelting potential of the country. Copper has been developed here since time immemorial. Ancient nomadic tribes and famous artisans used it to make arrowheads, utensils, and other household items. Copper in this region was found again in the late 18th century, and the first mining began in the middle of the 19th century. Ural Company for the Ryazanovs, who owned a copper plant near Karaganda, leased deposits from landowner Babur Bokenshuli. But funds simply were not enough to develop the field. Then, in 1908, the English engineer Garvey, who was engaged in production at the Ryazanovs factory, visited Zhezkazgan fields. He told Ural owners that copper extraction was hopeless. However, upon his return to England, he told quite different information. From Garvey's report, it became known that the Karsakpai copper deposits were one of the largest in the world. But the only drawback of this region was its distance from the nearest railway. A year later, British manufacturers began the work on the development of this region, having bought the Kazakh deposit for 260,000 rubles. In 1912, the British Joint Stock Company approved Garvey's project for the construction of a copper smelting plant in the tract Kazakh. And already in 1913, the first workers arrived here. 300 people, led by the English engineer West, began to erect a dam in the Kazakh River. The pace of construction was striking. A reservoir and 18 copper mines were established. Also in 1913, a factory was built where 1,200 workers were employed, mainly consisting of Ural masters and local residents. Everything necessary for the workers was brought on horses and camels, but when the issue of the technical equipment of the plant was raised, it was required to find another way of delivering heavy plant equipment. For this purpose, in 1914, an unusual train set off from Joly station towards the Kazakh River. West considered that it would be unprofitable to build a full-fledged railway and found the most practical solution, as it seemed to him. It was decided to lay the rails immediately before the train, and after the train sets off, to disassemble the past section. Thus, 13 kilometers of narrow gauge railway were built before the 2.5 kilometers long train. After that, the train was driven off, the rails were dismantled and again laid before the train. Now, this method of movement may seem strange, but at that time this idea was considered innovative and bold. In this way, the British planned to overcome the route of 400 kilometers for a year. Some strange incidents delayed construction of the railway for almost 2 years. First, the mechanism that helped lay the rails broke down, and massive heat wave hit the city, and people became dehydrated. There wasn't enough water for workers. They were shivering and feverish. West was at a loss. He could not understand why people became sick. To help the workers, the engineer went to the nearest village, which was a few hours away from the road. The inhabitants of the village were willing to help. Local people provided West's expedition with camel blankets and healing medicines, which turned out to be tail fat mixed with herbs. A local shepherd joined the engineer. He later explained his own way the reasons of the disease that struck everyone. As it turned out, there was an ancient burial ground in the foothills where the construction was going on. It was the burial of the nomadic warriors. The ancient spirits do not want you to disturb them and will hinder your work in every possible way. Turn to the west and get around this place, explained the shepherd to the engineer. Of course, the new route assumed new costs and delayed the construction deadline. But after waiting for a while and seeing that people do not recover, the English people decided to listen to the advice. The train skirted the hills, making a large arc, but this was the only way to continue the path. The workers persuaded the shepherd to go with them as a guide. Thus, the number of road workers increased by 1 more person. Over the next 3 months, the train with equipment passed half of the distance that had previously passed for the year. The only problem was the language barrier in communication with the conductor. The shepherd did not want to remember any unfamiliar English words. And to somehow understand each other, the English people had to learn some phrases in the Kazakh language. But the local resident also did not understand their pronunciation, so most of the way they were silent and communicated with gestures. Once a dramatic story happened to them on the approach to the Dusanbai River. The conductor unexpectedly banned the construction of a temporary bridge and road. He grabbed the map and crossed out the planned plot on it. First, they listened to his advice and waited. But after a few days, nothing bad happened. The engineer decided to continue the work. Knowing this, the shepherd objected. He began to point towards the river, hitting out the workers and taking away their tools. But when this did not help, the conductor began to tear up the technical calculations of the engineer. Several workers seized the maddened man and even tied his hands. The workers set to work again, but West stopped them. He freed the shepherd and decided to listen to him, just in case. The same night, a strong flood hit the river. It could easily demolish the temporary bridge along with the whole staff. This would inevitably cause human losses. The workers were astonished. How could the conductor know about the approaching flooding when there weren't even the slightest signs of it? They understood that a simple step man had just saved their lives using his own experience and the knowledge of his ancestors. Since then, the shepherd's words were of particular importance in the expedition. His instructions were fulfilled without the slightest question. Three years later, in October 1917, the builders approached the Kazakh River, on the other side of which the already constructed plant was located. An iron bridge with a stone brick base was erected across the river. The bridge is still kept to our days despite of shocks and changes. Today, it is called the English Bridge. Notwithstanding its respectable service time, it is still in good condition and is equal to modern bridges. However, the narrow gauge railway for which the English bridge was built no longer exists there. Like all 13 kilometers of railroad tracks, the rails were used in construction of the plant. The copper smelting plant was launched 2 months before the 17th revolution. Then, the new government forced the British people to leave their company and leave the country. And the Soviet government have benefited from the fruits of their work. The plant was nationalized and preserved. For almost 10 years, the production was idle. However, the new state needed resources, including copper and iron. Therefore, in 1922, the chairman of the VCHEKA, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution, Profiteering and Corruption, Felix Dzerzhinsky, supported the proposal of Kazakh Revolutionary Committee on the restoration of the plant. The remoteness of the region, the lack of specialists, all this cast doubt on the possibility of a rapid recovery of the production. There were even proposals to dismantle it and transport equipment to the Ural. However, in 1926, the mass construction of Karsakpai village began. Young Kanish Satpayev was appointed the chief of the geological department of Atbasar Non-Ferrous Metal Trust, to which the deposit belonged. He made an enormous effort to restore the enterprise. Reconstructive and construction works were very difficult. Without design institutes, experience and technologies, it was necessary not only to build a factory, but also to find skilled workers who simply did not exist. They were searched for across the country, and mainly local residents were trained. Many of them were trained in the Ural factories. In a short period of time, a coal dust factory, a stockyard, a building of crushing workshop, and the first reflecting furnace in the Soviet Union were built. For a year and a half, a narrow gauge railway between the mine, coal mines, and the plant was rebuilt. In 1928, Karsakpai copper smelting plant began operating. From this time, the village actively developed. In the 30s, Satpayev discovered new copper deposits. This was the golden age of the Karsakpai production, which continued until the discovery of the Zhezkazgan copper smelter in 1971. Later, the enterprise was restructured for the production of components for mining and metallurgical equipment. Today, the staff of a metallurgical plant consisting from 250 people is headed by Murat Matkenov. He is a representative of the famous dynasty of metallurgists. The main activity of the plant is the production of castings from cast iron for the needs of large enterprises. In general, the plant capacity totals 350 tons per year. In addition, it provides the local population and third-party organizations with water, heat, coal, and electricity. A dam, 3 bridges, roads, 33 buildings, and about 100 houses have been built thanks to the plant. And this English bridge on the Karsakpai River represents an open-air museum, stands as a reminder of the beginning of glorious deeds, the power of engineering thought, and contributed to the development of the whole region.